Hello, Yu-Gi-Oh players, and welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Business Casual. I'm your host, the RJB0. So, I'm sure you guys have noticed at one point or another, when a player goes to an event, usually a major event, a regional, YCS, even nationals, um, with a deck that nobody really thought was going to do much, and then they end up sitting at the top tables all day, topping the event, and even winning the event sometimes. And people almost always seem to be totally baffled by the occurrence. They're just not at all certain what happened that day. A lot of people say that, maybe their opponents just had no idea how to play against their deck, so they won by default, kind of. Or sometimes people say that the person just had easy matchups the entire day, or even stacked for most of their games, which of course you have to be skeptical about sometimes. But I think what these players are missing the most is the fact that these players played to their best, their ideal deck type. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. Why playing to your ideal deck type makes you as successful as the person who top 4 to YCS with Piper Chaos, or with Electrum OTK, or top nationals with Medolces, or something like that. So first off, playing to your ideal deck type makes you a better business casual player on both ends of the spectrum, both by having more fun and being more competitive. On the competitive end of things, playing your ideal deck type means you are playing the deck type that you know how to play best. And when you play the deck that you know how to play best, you're more likely to play better. You know what your matchups look like. You know how to play against your matchups. You know how to get around problematic strategies that a person who doesn't know that deck type as well might not be able to do, or that you might not be able to do if you are playing a different deck type. It also means that you are more likely to be able to outplay your opponent in the game because you are playing the kind of deck that works with you the best. On the having fun end of things, if you're playing the type of deck that you like to play the most, you're just more likely to have fun. I'm going to have more fun playing with a deck like Thunder Family than I am going to have if I was playing something like Constellars or something like that, with a very, very different deck strategy. So now I'm going to talk to you guys about what makes a deck type. Now, I have a slightly different way of scaling deck types, or categorizing deck types, that, true to form, is a little bit over analytical. The way that I determine a deck's type is through 3 factors. The first factor is the win condition and secondary strategy. Your second factor is your deck type, or not deck type, your deck play style. And then your third type is combo dependency. So the first category, the first factor, is actually the one that people work with the most. The most common way that people determine a deck type, which is their win condition. You have your stun, your aggro, your OTK, your control. Everybody, for the most part, determines what type a deck is based on its win condition, how it beats your opponent. And the way that I scale things is both with the win condition and with a secondary or support strategy. So I use 3 categories for win condition / support strategy. Those are aggro, control, and stun. Now, a lot of people would argue that stun and control are kind of subsets of each other, but I would actually argue against that. And the way that I define each of these categories is aggro. You beat your opponent with field presence. You overwhelm them with your proactive field presence, putting your own field presence on the board rather than taking away field presence from your opponent, which is the strategy for a control player. A control player allows your opponent to create a field, but then you control their field after that. You use removal. You change what they can do with the monsters that they have on the field. That's what a control deck does. They beat their opponent with removal, and by changing the rules of the game. A stun deck, however, and this is where I differentiate stun from control, a stun deck, its win condition is keeping your opponent from getting a foothold in the game. Whereas control allows the opponent to put plays on the board and then controls how they use those plays. Stun players or stun decks just take those plays off the board. You try to make a play, you stop it. Your opponent tries to set up for a play, you stop it. And for each of these categories that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to have a separate video, probably just 2 minutes long, describing that strategy and what decks go into it. So, of course, every deck also has one of these as its secondary or support strategy, and I'll get to that once I get to talking about what each of those is. So let's move on to the deck's playstyle. The two ends of playstyle are utility and toolboxing. Now, these are often used interchangeably in the game, but the way that I'm going to define them today is that toolboxing is focusing on creating new resources, whereas utility decks use the visible resources on their hand, on their field, and in their graveyard in order to outplay the opponent or to create their strategies. An example of a very utility deck is gadgets. Gadgets just produce resources. That's pretty much how the deck works. An example of something that's more utility maybe is Dino Rabbit. You basically have a set number of resources. You see your rabbit, you see your warning, your bottomless, your torrential, and maybe a tour guide. You see those resources and you know what you're going to have available for the rest of the game. Whereas, of course, your toolbox deck, you're just going to be creating more resources rather than focusing so much around efficient use of the resources that you already have. So the final category is combo dependency. Now, a combo dependent deck is a deck that absolutely has to use cards in tandem or in combo with each other. They have to have at least 2 cards available to them in order to make their plays work. These are decks like Karakuri. Gravekeepers rely on a lot of 2-card combos. Let's see, I can think of others when I talk about combo in the combo video. But on the other hand, you have card-based decks. Decks that use individual cards alone more often than they use cards together with each other. These are things like maybe Chain Beat is an example of this, or Constellar is another good example, where you use individual cards kind of to support each other, but you do not use them in combo with each other. So those are the 3 factors in determining a deck type, and it creates kind of a formula. So, for example, you can have a card-based utility stun deck with an aggro secondary strategy. And that is the formula, I believe, for Dino Rabbit and Evil Swarms. Or you could have a combo-based toolbox control deck with a secondary aggro strategy, which is windups. So you get these kind of formulas that separate decks from each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload my graphs that I've been making of deck types, and I'm going to put those onto Facebook. So if you want to see how that works, you can check out my Facebook page. I've mapped out a lot of decks, I think 30 of them so far, as to what their deck formula is. And then from now on, I'm going to be every day, I hope, putting up a 2-minute video on what each category means and what decks fall into each of them. So I hope you guys like this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why in the comment section below. And then subscribe for more helpful tips on finding your ideal deck type. I hope that you guys find this to be a really useful resource. Meanwhile, hope you guys like this video. And thank you guys for watching Yu-Gi-Oh! And Business Casual. I'm your host, the RJB0, and I got a jet. See you guys.